Welcome to a deep dive into the life of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Okay.
You want to understand the man behind the myth.
Right.
And we're going to sift through some excerpts from his biography to try to separate facts from fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be surprised to learn that despite his portrayal in popular culture as a rather short figure, Napoleon was actually of average height for his time. Talk about a persistent historical misconception.
It's interesting how those misconceptions take root, isn't it?
It really is.
It really speaks to the power of imagery and how even centuries later, Napoleon's image continues to captivate us.
It really does.
Yeah.
So let's rewind back to Napoleon's beginnings.
Okay.
His story doesn't even begin in mainland France.
Oh.
He was born on the island of Corsica to a family of minor Italian nobility.
Interesting.
Not exactly the typical French power player, right?
That's a crucial point. This outsider status really fueled Napoleon's drive and ambition.
Yeah.
He wasn't handed power or privilege. He had to claw his way up from the very beginning. And that early struggle shaped his worldview.
And it did. But before we delve into his military achievements, I'm fascinated by the role his mother, Letizia Ramolino, played.
Okay.
The biography really emphasizes her strong personality and the way she instilled discipline in Napoleon. It seems like she was a force to be reckoned with.
It's often said that behind every great man is a strong mother, and in Napoleon's case, that rings particularly true.
Right.
Think of it like this. She was building the foundation for his future successes, almost like a sculptor shaping raw clay. Her strength and determination were absolutely imprinted on him.
And from there, it's off to military school.
Yeah.
It seems like an almost inevitable step considering his trajectory.
It might seem that way in hindsight.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember the historical context.
Okay.
The French Revolution was brewing, and even as a young man, Napoleon was drawn to its ideals. He saw the upheaval not as chaos, but as an opportunity to rise above his humble beginnings. It's a recurring theme in his life, turning turmoil to his advantage.
And rise he did.
He did.
The siege of Toulon was his breakout moment.
Yeah.
His tactical brilliance on full display, leading to a decisive victory for the French.
Right.
This not only put him on the map, but it also caught the eye of powerful figures in the French military.
Toulon was a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Think of it as a strategic chess move.
Okay.
He showed the French military leadership. He was a daring strategist willing to think outside the box. This victory cemented his reputation and gave him the clout he needed to further his ambitions.
Yeah.
But it also marked the beginning of a pattern.
Okay.
Napoleon had an almost uncanny knack for seizing opportunities amidst political chaos.
And speaking of chaos, he then gets involved in the 13 Vendémiaire uprising.
Okay.
For those not familiar, this was basically a royalist revolt against the new French government known as the Directory. Napoleon's decisive actions in quelling this rebellion solidified his position within the Directory and further increased his influence. It seems like every challenge just propelled him higher.
It really begs the question,
Now what?
Was Napoleon simply lucky to be in the right place at the right time? Or was he a master manipulator orchestrating events to his advantage?
Right.
It's a debate that continues to fascinate historians to this day.
You have to wonder if a little bit of both was at play, right?
I think so.
Now let's switch gears for a moment to his personal life.
All right.
His marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais, it was this whirlwind romance.
It was.
But there's also this fascinating detail that she came from a slave-owning family in the French colonies.
Huh.
Quite a contrast, wouldn't you say?
It absolutely is. Here you have Napoleon, champion of revolutionary ideals, marrying into a family whose wealth was built on the backs of enslaved people.
Yeah.
This paradox really highlights the complexities of the era and reveals the moral contradictions within Napoleon himself.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive into Napoleon's military genius.
Okay.
The first Italian campaign is where it truly shines. He employed innovative tactics like his masterful use of artillery.
He did.
What I find particularly interesting is that he actually founded newspapers during the campaign.
Really?
He was already a master of controlling the narrative even back then.
Think of it this way.
Yeah.
Napoleon recognized the power of information warfare. He wanted to ensure his victories were known, celebrated, and amplified, which in turn fueled his popularity back home.
Right.
It was a shrewd strategy, almost like a modern-day public relations campaign.
Talk about ahead of his time now. The Egyptian expedition adds another layer to the Napoleon puzzle.
Okay.
On one hand, you have the incredible discovery of the Rosetta Stone by the scientists accompanying his army. But then there's the darker side, the brutality at Jaffa, where he ordered the execution of thousands of prisoners.
Yeah.
It really underscores the fact that history is rarely black and white.
The Egyptian expedition embodies that duality perfectly.
It does.
It was a campaign driven by both a thirst for knowledge and a willingness to use brutal tactics to achieve his goals. This forces us to confront the full spectrum of Napoleon's character.
Yeah.
He was a man of great intellect and ambition, but also capable of ruthlessness.
So we have Napoleon back in France having achieved great success in the Italian and Egyptian campaigns. He then capitalizes on the political instability back home and seizes power in the coup of 18 Brumaire.
Right.
It's almost hard to believe how quickly he ascended to become the First Consul of France.
Napoleon thrived in the midst of turmoil. The instability of the French government provided the perfect opportunity for him to capitalize on.
Yeah.
Remember that chess analogy? He was always thinking several moves ahead, strategically positioning himself for ultimate power.
So he consolidates his power as First Consul, establishes the consulate, and eventually crowns himself Emperor of France.
He does.
It seems his ambition knew no bounds.
And yet he cleverly uses plebiscites or public votes to legitimize his rule. Now, of course, those votes were likely manipulated to some degree,
Right.
but it demonstrates Napoleon's awareness of public opinion. He understood the importance of maintaining the illusion of popular support, even as he consolidated his power.
A shrewd politician indeed. And then there's this intriguing event, the Louisiana Purchase.
Okay.
He sells off this massive chunk of land in North America to the United States, primarily to finance his wars in Europe.
Right.
It's a bold move that reshaped the map of North America.
It also highlights Napoleon's pragmatism. He was willing to make strategic sacrifices, even territorial ones, to achieve his larger goals.
Yeah.
This decision ultimately benefited both France and the nascent United States, showing that even amidst war, there's room for unexpected deals.
And of course, we can't forget about his string of victories in the Napoleonic Wars.
We can't.
Victories like Austerlitz, Jena Auerstedt, and Friedland solidify his dominance across Europe.
Yeah.
He was virtually unstoppable.
These victories cemented Napoleon's military genius and his control over much of Europe. However, they also had an unintended consequence. They fueled his ego and led him to believe he was invincible, a belief that would ultimately sow the seeds of his downfall.
Right.
Remember, even the mightiest empires can crumble.
And that's a great point, speaking of empires. Napoleon tries to implement the continental system, this grand plan to cripple Britain economically by blocking their trade with continental Europe. It was an ambitious strategy, but it ultimately backfired.
The continental system reveals both Napoleon's strategic thinking and his limitations.
Right.
While it was a clever idea on paper, it ultimately underestimated the resilience of the British economy and the power of their navy.
It feels like we've reached a turning point here.
We have.
All these victories, all this power. Can it possibly last?
The seeds of doubt are definitely planted.
Yeah.
And as we'll see, those seeds will grow into some of Napoleon's most challenging moments. History has a way of reminding us that nothing lasts forever, particularly when it comes to power. Napoleon's triumphs, though impressive, couldn't shield him from the impending storm.
And what a storm it was, the invasion of Russia in 1812. Talk about a catastrophic miscalculation. The scorched earth tactics employed by the Russians, the brutal winter conditions, and the sheer vastness of the country, it all conspired against Napoleon and his grand army.
It was a disaster of epic proportions. Napoleon's invasion force, over 600,000 strong at the start, was decimated. The Russian campaign exposed the limitations of his logistical capabilities and the vulnerability of his troops to harsh conditions. This wasn't the neatly orchestrated chess game of his earlier campaigns. It was a brutal lesson in the realities of overreaching ambition.
It's a chilling reminder that even the most brilliant military minds can make fatal errors. The retreat from Moscow is particularly haunting, thousands upon thousands of soldiers perishing from hunger, disease, and the relentless Russian winter.
The images from that retreat are seared into history. Imagine the desperation, the sheer will to survive amidst such unimaginable suffering. The Russian campaign not only shattered the myth of Napoleon's invincibility, but also emboldened his enemies across Europe. They sensed weakness and opportunity to strike back.
And strike back they did. The War of the Sixth Coalition. A coalition of European powers against Napoleon ultimately leads to his defeat at the Battle of Leipzig. It's a dramatic fall from grace, abdication, exile to Elba. It seems his reign is over.
It's a stark testament to the fragility of power. One moment you're at the pinnacle dictating the fate of nations, and the next you're forced into exile on a tiny island. But even in defeat, Napoleon wasn't finished. His story takes yet another unexpected turn.
And that's what makes it so captivating, the escape from Elba, the return to France, rallying supporters for the 100 Days' War. It's a remarkable comeback attempt.
The 100 Days' War reveals a lot about Napoleon's personality. Even after being defeated and exiled, he still possessed that undeniable charisma and the ability to inspire fervent loyalty. It's as if exile had rekindled the fire within him.
But ultimately, it all culminates in Waterloo, the final defeat, the end of the Napoleonic era. It feels almost Shakespearean in its tragedy. The once mighty emperor, now a prisoner of fate.
Waterloo is the definitive closing chapter in Napoleon's epic story. It marks the end of his imperial ambitions and the beginning of his legend. Think about it. His name is synonymous with ambition, strategy, both triumph and defeat. Few historical figures evoke such powerful imagery.
And so the stage is set for his final exile, this time to the remote island of Saint Helena in the South Atlantic. It's a far cry from the palaces of Europe.
Saint Helena was a deliberate choice by the British. They wanted to ensure Napoleon was isolated far from any chance of escape or another audacious comeback. Imagine warships constantly patrolling the waters surrounding the island, a constant reminder of his confinement.
Talk about adding insult to injury, but even in exile, Napoleon's story continues to unfold. He dictates his memoirs, receives visitors, even tries to learn English. It seems his mind was still as active as ever.
He was determined to control the narrative of his life, even in captivity. Those memoirs became a powerful tool for shaping his image and legacy. He wanted to be remembered as a brilliant leader, a victim of circumstance. It's a testament to his unwavering will.
I was struck by the descriptions of his living conditions at Longwood House. Dampness, rats, poor food. It sounds utterly miserable.
There's debate among historians about the conditions at Longwood. Some argue the British intentionally made his life uncomfortable, hoping to hasten his death. Others believe it was simply a reflection of the harsh realities of life on a remote island in those times. Regardless, it was a far cry from the opulence he was accustomed to.
And what ultimately led to Napoleon's death, the official cause, was stomach cancer. But there have always been rumors of arsenic poisoning. It adds another layer of mystery to his already enigmatic life.
The true cause of death continues to be a source of speculation. Was it cancer as the official records state, or was there something more sinister at play? The possibility of arsenic poisoning has fueled countless conspiracy theories over the years. It's almost as if people can't accept that a figure like Napoleon could succumb to something as mundane as illness.
Even in death, he continues to spark intrigue. And what a final twist to fate. After years in exile, his remains are eventually returned to France for a grand state funeral. It's as if the nation couldn't fully let him go.
It's a powerful testament to the enduring legacy of Napoleon, decades after his death. He remained a symbol of national pride, military glory, and a reminder of France's past dominance. Even today, his tomb at Les Invalides in Paris is a site of pilgrimage for people from around the world.
It seems Napoleon's story transcends the boundaries of time. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and explore Napoleon's impact beyond the battlefield. He implemented some significant reforms in France, shaping the nation's future in profound ways.
Absolutely. Napoleon's influence extended far beyond his military conquests. He was a man of action, determined to leave his mark on every aspect of French society. He centralized the government, created a new legal system, established a national bank. His reforms touched virtually every facet of French life.
Let's start with the Napoleonic Code. It's considered one of his most enduring achievements, influencing legal systems around the world. To this day, it's a legacy that extends far beyond the borders of France.
The Napoleonic Code was revolutionary, a codified French law, and introduced principles that we take for granted today, like equality before the law and religious tolerance. It replaced a patchwork of regional laws and customs with a unified legal framework, bringing order and consistency to the legal system.
It's fascinating how he managed to balance his military campaigns with such sweeping domestic reforms. It speaks to his incredible energy and drive. But it's also interesting that the code reduced the rights of women and children. It seems like a contradiction given his championing of equality in other areas.
It's a crucial point. While the Napoleonic Code was groundbreaking in many ways, it also reflects the limitations of the era. Napoleon, despite his progressive ideals, was still a man of his time. The Code, while promoting equality in some spheres, reinforced the patriarchal norms that were deeply ingrained in 19th century society.
It's a reminder that progress is rarely linear now. Let's talk about his administrative reforms. He reorganized the government from the top down, creating a more efficient and centralized system.
Napoleon was a master administrator. He recognized that bureaucracy, if wielded effectively, could be a powerful tool for control. He established a network of prefects, sub-prefects, and mayors who answered directly to him, ensuring his authority reached every corner of France. It was a system designed for efficiency and control.
He also introduced the metric system, which is now used by most of the world. Talk about a lasting legacy. It's something we use every day without even thinking about it.
The metric system perfectly encapsulates Napoleon's forward-thinking approach. He saw the need for a standardized system of measurement, one that would facilitate trade and communication. It was a simple but brilliant innovation that has had a profound impact on our daily lives.
Yeah, and then there's the Legion of Honor, a prestigious award that's still given out in France today. It represents Napoleon's desire to recognize and reward achievement both in military and civilian spheres.
The Legion of Honor was more than just an award. It was a carefully crafted symbol designed to foster national unity and loyalty to his regime. Napoleon understood the power of symbol ceremony and public recognition. He used them strategically to bolster his image and consolidate his power.
Now, shifting our focus to Napoleon's personality, the biography paints a complex picture. He was brilliant, ambitious, charming, but also ruthless, prone to anger, and even a bit superstitious. It's quite a mix.
Napoleon was a man of contradictions, which is precisely what makes him so fascinating to study. He was a visionary leader driven by an insatiable thirst for power, but he was also capable of great cruelty and ruthlessness. His personality continues to captivate historians and psychologists, inviting endless debate and analysis.
It's almost hard to reconcile the image of this brilliant military strategist with someone who believed in omens and lucky stars. It seems at odds with his reputation for rational strategic thinking.
It's yet another example of Napoleon's complex nature. He was a product of both the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, and the Romantic era, with its focus on intuition and emotion. He embraced both, reflecting the paradoxical nature of the human experience itself.
So the ultimate question was, Napoleon a force for good or evil? How should history judge him? It's a question that has sparked endless debate.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. Napoleon's legacy is a tapestry woven with both positive and negative threads. He spread revolutionary ideals across Europe, but he also waged devastating wars that claimed millions of lives. He implemented lasting reforms, but he also reinstated slavery and restricted the rights of women.
It's that duality that makes him such a captivating figure. He was a brilliant military strategist, a gifted administrator, and a charismatic leader, but he was also a ruthless dictator who caused immense suffering. It's impossible to neatly categorize him as simply good or evil.
It seems that with figures like Napoleon, the scales of justice never quite settle. His actions continue to spark debate and inspire both admiration and condemnation.
It makes you think about how history is often written by the victors. How much of what we know about Napoleon is colored by the perspectives of those who ultimately defeated him.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
It's always important to consider the source when studying history. Who's telling the story? What are their motivations? Napoleon's image has certainly been shaped and reshaped over time.
Right.
Think about the British propaganda that demonized him during the Napoleonic Wars, portraying him as a power-hungry tyrant. Then in contrast, you have the romantic paintings and novels that emerged later, casting him as a tragic hero, a victim of his own ambition.
It's amazing how his image has evolved over time. He's gone from the bogeyman of British propaganda to the almost mythical figure we see in romantic art.
Napoleon understood the power of imagery, even using it to his advantage.
Yeah.
Remember the iconic painting of him crossing the Alps on horseback?
Oh, yeah.
That was carefully orchestrated to project an image of power, leadership, and invincibility.
Right.
It's a powerful example of how images can shape our perception of historical figures.
And even today, his bicorn hat and handed waistcoat pose are instantly recognizable. They've become cultural shorthand for Napoleon, almost like a logo. It's fascinating how certain images become so deeply ingrained in our collective memory.
It speaks to our enduring fascination with Napoleon. He was a larger-than-life figure who left an indelible mark on history. Both for good and for bad, we're still grappling with the complexities of his legacy centuries later.
And speaking of those complexities, we need to address some of his more controversial actions. The reintroduction of slavery in the French colonies, for example, is a dark stain on his record. It seems to contradict everything he stood for as a revolutionary.
It's a stark reminder that even the most celebrated historical figures can have deeply flawed legacies. Napoleon's decision to reinstate slavery in the colonies was driven by economic motives, and unfortunately by the prevailing racist ideologies of his time. It's a difficult truth to reconcile with the image of him as a champion of liberty and equality.
And his treatment of women, while perhaps not unusual for the era, also raises concerns. The Napoleonic Code, despite its many advancements, still placed women firmly under the control of their husbands, limiting their legal rights and agency.
Napoleon's views on women were, like many things about him, complex and somewhat contradictory.
Right.
He admired strong women like his mother and Josephine, yet he also firmly believed that a woman's place was primarily in the domestic sphere. The Napoleonic Code unfortunately reflects this view, reinforcing traditional patriarchal norms.
So how do we reconcile these contradictions? Was Napoleon a progressive reformer, a ruthless dictator, or something in between? It seems his legacy is ultimately a mixed bag.
That's the challenge of grappling with history, isn't it? It's rarely black and white. We must acknowledge both the positive and negative aspects of historical figures, even those as complex and contradictory as Napoleon.
It's tempting to want to categorize historical figures neatly, to label them as heroes or villains, but that's not how history works.
Right.
It's messy, it's nuanced, and it's full of contradictions.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not about finding easy answers, but rather engaging in a continuous process of exploration, interpretation, and debate.
So where does that leave us? What's the key takeaway for someone trying to understand Napoleon today?
I think the most important takeaway is that Napoleon was both a product of his time and a figure who transcended his time. His actions were shaped by the political, social, and cultural forces of the early 19th century, yet they also had a profound impact on the course of history, shaping the world we live in today.
He was a man of immense talent and ambition, a brilliant military mind, a skilled administrator, and a charismatic leader. But he was also capable of great cruelty and made decisions that had devastating consequences. He was a complex figure who inspires both admiration and condemnation.
And ultimately, it's up to each of us to wrestle with that complexity, to weigh the evidence, and to form our own conclusions about Napoleon's place in history. There's no single right answer, and that's okay.
It's that very ambiguity that keeps us coming back to figures like Napoleon. Their stories challenge us to think critically about the past, to grapple with the complexities of human nature, and to acknowledge that history is an ongoing conversation, not a set of fixed pronouncements.
And that brings us back to you, the listener, as you continue to explore the life and legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte. Remember to keep asking questions, to challenge assumptions, and to embrace the nuances. There's always more to discover, more to learn, and more to debate about this fascinating and enigmatic figure.
That's a perfect note to end on. Napoleon's story reminds us that history is never simple, and its figures are never one-dimensional. It's a story that continues to resonate with us today, challenging us to confront the complexities of the past and to grapple with the enduring legacies of power, ambition, and the human condition.